Arrogant professors mock a poor student, until she solves an impossible equation. From the hushed whispers to the thunderous applause, they underestimated her. Every sidelong glance, every doubt-filled murmur, fueled the fire within Isha Ellison as she walked into the lion's den of the lecture hall. The air hung thick with unspoken prejudice, a suffocating blend of skepticism and outright disbelief, clinging to her like a shroud. Her fingers, icy despite the humid air, clenched the strap of her backpack, a silent battle raging within. She wasn't just stepping into a classroom. She was entering a battlefield where her presence challenged the established order. This wasn't just about acing a test but about surviving a gauntlet. The room, a cavernous space designed to intimidate, amplified the weight of expectations. Rows upon rows of expectant faces, a sea of privilege and prejudgment, stared back at her. Whispers danced like venomous snakes, slithering through the aisles as she found her seat. Dr. Charles Henshaw, a man whose reputation for intellectual ruthlessness preceded him like a storm cloud, strode in, silencing the room with a single, glacial glare. He was known for dismantling egos and rebuilding them in his image if, that is, the student survived the process. Isha had conquered pressure before, thrived in the crucible of demanding problem sets and cutthroat competitions. But this was different. This wasn't just about proving her intellect. It was about battling ingrained bias, about proving her right to be there. Henshaw's eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the room, dismissing the designer-clad students with barely a glance before settling on Isha, his gaze lingering with cruel fascination. A predatory smirk twisted his lips. "Miss Ellison," he drawled, each syllable dripping with condescension. "Shall we see what you're capable of? Perhaps you could enlighten us with a solution to this little puzzle?" A ripple of excitement, laced with anticipation of her potential failure, pulsed through the room. It wasn't mere curiosity. It was a hunger to witness her stumble. This wasn't an invitation. It was a calculated public execution. Isha's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. She slammed her notebook shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Rising with deliberate slowness, she forced herself to meet his gaze, refusing to betray even a flicker of apprehension. This was her arena. This was her fight. She wouldn't just solve the equation, she'd shatter their preconceptions. The chalk felt strangely heavy in her hand as she approached the board, the silence amplifying the scrape of her shoes against the polished floor. The equation loomed before her, a complex tapestry of symbols designed to ensnare and embarrass. A whispered barb pierced the tense air. "She's going to crash and burn." Another, dripping with condescension. "Does she even know what a derivative is?" She blocked them out, channeling the years of relentless study, the countless hours spent wrestling with the language of numbers. This wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about defying expectations, about claiming her space in a world that constantly tried to shrink her. The moment the chalk kissed the blackboard, a hush fell, more profound than before. Every eye was riveted on her, dissecting her every move. She moved with surgical precision, each line a testament to her meticulous preparation. The problem wasn't merely about finding the solution, it was about finding the most elegant solution, the path that spoke of profound understanding. A conventional approach would suffice, but Isha saw a shortcut, a leap of intuition that only a true master of the material could perceive. Henshaw stood like a granite statue, his arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. The condescending smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of intense scrutiny. He wasn't merely observing, he was hunting for weakness, waiting for her to falter. Isha reached the midpoint, her hand hovering for a fraction of a second as she double-checked her work. Not out of doubt, but out of a deeply ingrained awareness that her every move would be dissected and scrutinized. She wouldn't give them an inch. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a palpable tension. The smirks had faded, replaced by grudging admiration. The equation began to unravel under her sure hand, each term collapsing into place with satisfying precision. A sharp exhale hissed from the back of the room. "She's actually doing it." Another voice, laced with reluctant awe. "And she's doing it fast. Dot." Henshaw cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "Ensure you are not omitting vital steps, Miss Ellison," he said, his voice taut with suppressed frustration. Isha didn't turn, didn't break her stride. "I am not." The words hung in the air, a challenge thrown down with unwavering confidence. A collective gasp rippled through the class. It wasn't the what, she said, but the how, the unwavering conviction in her voice, the absolute certainty that radiated from her like a palpable force. She wrote the final line, boxed the answer with a flourish, and stepped back, the chalk clattering against the ledge. Silence. A suffocating, absolute silence, as if the entire room held its breath. Henshaw stalked forward, his eyes devouring the solution, his fingers tracing the elegant dance of equations. He wasn't verifying her answer. He was desperately searching for a flaw, a loophole, anything to salvage his authority. The longer he stood there, the more undeniable it became. She had triumphed. Finally, he exhaled, a harsh, ragged sound that betrayed his inner turmoil. He turned to the class, his jaw tight. "An unconventional approach," he conceded, the words dripping with grudging acknowledgement. "But correct." A voice sliced through the tension, filled with unrestrained admiration. "That wasn't just correct, Dr. Henshaw," Dr. Vivian Parker declared, rising from her seat. "That was brilliant." But Henshaw, wounded and desperate to regain control, wasn't ready to cede the victory. His fingers drummed a restless tattoo against the podium as he scanned Isha's work, searching for a weakness, a chink in her armor. The students were frozen, their gazes darting between Henshaw and the board, their faces a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. The air crackled with anticipation, the energy in the room shifting from dismissive skepticism to open curiosity. "Interesting," Henshaw said finally, his voice carefully modulated. "But let's examine this more closely." He snatched up a fresh piece of chalk and underlined a critical part of her solution. "You chose to circumvent the standard method, opting for a direct derivative transformation. Tell me, Miss Ellison, what led you to believe this was the optimal approach?" The trap was subtle, a veiled challenge to her judgment. He wasn't questioning the answer, he was questioning her right to make that decision. Isha met his gaze, unflinching. "The traditional method introduces unnecessary complexity. This approach eliminates redundant calculations and achieves a faster solution." A few students shifted in their seats, scribbling furiously as they realized she had just illuminated a more efficient pathway than they had been taught. Henshaw's eyebrow arched, his expression unreadable. "And what if I were to suggest that such shortcuts can lead to potential miscalculations?" Isha's voice was calm, unwavering. "They can. But in this case, they did not." A low chuckle escaped from the back of the room, shattering the tension. The students were beginning to see at her brilliance, her audacity, her unwavering confidence. Henshaw's grip on the chalk tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Confidence is admirable, Miss Ellison. Let us put it to the test." He turned to the board, and with swift, brutal strokes, wrote a new equation, a monstrous tangle of variables and exponents designed to confound even the most seasoned mathematician. "Let's see if your method holds up here." Isha didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, picked up the chalk, and studied the equation. It was a formidable challenge, but challenge was in her DNA. She began to write, the chalk gliding across the board, leaving behind a trail of elegant solutions. This time, the weight of the room felt different, not just expectation, but anticipation, even hope. The dismissive glances had transformed into looks of rapt attention. Students who had barely acknowledged her before now leaned forward, their pens poised over their notebooks, hungry for insight. 5 minutes bled into 10. Henshaw remained silent, his gaze fixed on the unfolding equation, his face a mask of suppressed frustration. Finally, Isha reached the end, boxing the answer with a decisive stroke. "That is the solution." Henshaw stared at the board, his silence deafening. Then, Dr. Parker rose again, her voice ringing with admiration. "That," she declared, striding to the front, "is nothing short of genius." While the professors processed the implications of her triumph, The tectonic plates were shifting amongst the students. The energy in the room had been irrevocably altered. The initial test had morphed into something profound, something undeniable. The students who had dismissed her were now exchanging awestruck glances. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "She skipped 3 steps and still nailed it." Another replied, his voice hushed with wonder. Isha remained calm, composed, as if she hadn't just turned the entire room's perception of her upside down. Dr. Parker, standing beside the board, crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping over the intricate solution. "Not only is it correct, but she identified an optimization that most students wouldn't even consider. You should be impressed, Dr. Henshaw." Henshaw's jaw tightened, a flicker of raw anger flashing in his eyes. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "It's certainly a different approach," he said, reaching for the chalk. Parker stopped him, her tone gentle but firm. "No need. I've already verified it. It's flawless." For the first time, Henshaw faltered. He had built his career on being the ultimate authority, the sole arbiter of intellectual merit. And now, a first-year student, one he had so casually dismissed, had challenged that authority without uttering a single disrespectful word. Isha braced herself, waiting for the inevitable backlash. A student, one who had snickered at her earlier, tentatively raised his hand. "Professor," he stammered, Could Isha explain how she identified that shortcut? I wouldn't have even thought to approach it that way." Parker beamed. "An excellent idea. Isha, would you mind walking us through your reasoning?" For the first time that day, Isha hesitated, not out of insecurity, but out of surprise. She had never been asked to explain her thought process, not without the implicit threat of judgment hanging in the air. She glanced at the board, gathering her thoughts. "I focused on the structure of the equation," she began, her voice steady, measured. "Instead of following the standard procedure, I noticed a pattern in the coefficients that allowed me to factor out certain terms early, simplifying the problem before I even started solving. That's why you skipped the second step." Another student muttered, awestruck. "It wasn't a guess, it was intentional." Parker smiled. "Precisely." Henshaw remained silent, watching the room shift around him. The students, once so eager to please him, were now captivated by Isha, their faces alight with newfound respect. Isha hadn't needed their validation, but witnessing the transformation, the dawning realization in their eyes, was a victory in itself. She had proven that brilliance transcends prejudice. Henshaw stood stiffly, the carefully constructed facade of control crumbling around him. The class was no longer his to command. Their attention had shifted to Isha, to her ingenuity, to the unsettling realization that she wasn't just capable, she was exceptional. He could feel it, the subtle shift in the air, the unspoken acknowledgement of her superior intellect. His grip tightened on the chalk. "Well," he said finally, his voice carefully devoid of emotion, "it appears Miss Ellison has a unique way of approaching the material." "Unique?" Parker countered, her tone deceptively mild. "I would call it advanced. She didn't just solve the problem, she optimized it. That's not just talent, that's mastery." Henshaw's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. He was cornered, and he knew it. His usual tactics were useless against her proven brilliance. So, he did what men like him always did. He adjusted his tie, forced a thin smile, and nodded curtly. "Yes, well, I suppose we'll see how she performs on the next exam." Isha didn't flinch, but she understood the thinly veiled threat. This wasn't over. But she had made her point. As the class packed up, the murmurs returned, but the melody had changed. Students who had previously dismissed her now stole glances, their faces a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and lingering unease. One of them, the one who had openly mocked her earlier, hesitated as she slung her backpack over her shoulder. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "That was impressive." Isha paused, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I know." He blinked, then chuckled softly. "All right then." She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps light. She had spent years proving herself in hostile environments. This was nothing new. But today, something had shifted, not just in the room, but within her. She had known her worth. Now they did too. Respect wasn't freely given, it was earned. And she had just earned it in spades. Isha stepped out of the lecture hall, the door clicking shut behind her. The cool afternoon air washed over her, a stark contrast to the stifling tension within. She inhaled deeply, releasing the weight of the past hour. She had triumphed. She had not just solved the equation, but had stood her ground against a formidable opponent. She had changed something. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her messages as she crossed the campus. A notification popped up. Her friend Robert had texted. "Robert, how was class?" Isha smirked, her fingers flying across the screen. "Isha, same as usual, except I just made Henshaw eat his own words." The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. "Robert, no way. What happened?" Isha considered how to condense the epic tale into a single message. "Isha, let's just say he thought he could embarrass me. He ended up embarrassing himself." Robert's reply arrived in seconds. "Robert, that man has been a problem for years. About time someone put him in his place." Isha chuckled. She wasn't naive. One class, one moment wouldn't erase ingrained prejudice. Henshaw wouldn't suddenly become an ally. Some students would still see her as an outsider. But this wasn't just about them. It was about every student who would follow her, the ones who would sit in that same room, face the same challenges, feel the same crushing weight of expectation. She had cracked open the door, forced them to see her not as an anomaly, but as what she truly was: brilliant, unapologetic, unshaken. And that was a victory worth fighting for. She slipped her phone into her pocket, her steps lighter than they had been that morning. Respect wasn't something you waited for, it was something you demanded. And she would demand it every single time. If you've ever felt underestimated, let this be your reminder: your talent speaks for itself. You don't need permission to be great. Keep pushing. Keep proving them wrong. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that matter.